Life Matters, a Penn Mutual podcast for financial professionals, bringing you life insurance insights from advanced sales experts and life insurance specialists. Grow a stronger practice today.
Life Matters, a Penn Mutual podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bell, Vice President of Advanced Sales with Penn Mutual, and I am so happy that you chose to join us here today. Now, for the third time, I have a co-host today. Jenna Washatka, one of our superstar advanced sales team members, is here with me here today. Hi, Jenna.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for sharing the mic with me again today.
Oh, happy to do so. Now, before we get going on the actual podcast here today, we have some breaking news.
Breaking news.
Now, our listeners might be thinking, oh, Bill's going to be talking about the Connolly Supreme Court decision, but no.
But no, even bigger. Even bigger.
Even bigger. So for our longtime listeners that listened to the episode that we did with Tom Meyer, which I believe is called Sales Strategies and Market Insights, at roughly the 28-minute and 45-second mark of the podcast, we mentioned that Jenna Washatka had never been to Skyline Chili in Cincinnati. But Jenna, I believe that's changed. Is that correct?
I do have an update. And I think what's most shocking, apparently, is that I have spent the better part of the last 15 years in Cincinnati and had not had it. All I can say is it was quite delicious, but I was truly in physical pain the entire day. So will it be a repeat occurrence? Perhaps not. But I did it.
But your kids loved it, right?
My kids did love it. They did absolutely love it. And at the end of the day, we got whatever we wanted, and it was about $20. So you can't beat that.
That's fantastic. See, I made the analogy that it's like going to the gym after never working out and getting in a squat rack and doing 3 sets of 10 with maximum weight, that you have to train your body for the Skyline experience. And
I was not trained.
You were not ready. So next time you're ready. And just a reminder,
not marathon ready.
And just a reminder for those of you that are in the Cincinnati area, I will be there in December. Jenna will be there in December. We'll be doing meetings in the Cincinnati area. So if you want to meet up and have some chili, just let me know. I'm happy to meet at Skyline for any business event going forward.
You know, Bill, they do have salad on the menu. So that's probably what I will be after next time.
Yeah, that's like going to Chick-fil-A and getting a salad.
Yeah, I suppose.
Fair enough.
Less pain.
All right. So let's actually talk about some real stuff here. So we are here to talk about wealth transfer planning here today. And we actually had 2 awesome guests that joined myself and Jenna individually here. Now, one thing that I did want to mention right up top here is now that these podcasts are also going to be available via video, soon to be on the Penn Mutual YouTube channel. You might notice that we are wearing different outfits throughout the podcast because this is not like a Family Feud situation where you have to bring 5 outfits for if you just keep advancing throughout the different shows. This is something we actually do over a multi-day type of thing. So I'm wearing a different shirt. Jenna's wearing a different outfit.
No, I'm not. No, I'm wearing the same pink suit that I wore to interview Amy, actually. So same for me.
Well, see, Jenna is a forward thinker. I am not. I'm wearing a different shirt. So anyways, what we did is we broke it up into 2 parts. So first, I talked with my good friend, Tim McFarland, who is an advanced sales attorney for NFP Partners Financial. I've known Tim for literally decades. And we talked about estate planning for the 99%, essentially what you would be doing for people that are not subject to the federal estate tax, but still have a need for wealth transfer planning, which is a huge part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. Part of that is we also talked about the Connolly decision. I'm sure by the time this comes out, everybody's going to be very familiar with Connolly, but certainly a lot of great insights in there as well. And then Jenna talked with another of our advanced sales team members, Amy Bryant, who is also a superstar on the team, about planning for the other 1%, those people that do have a federal estate tax issue and what we should be talking about with those particular clients. So Jenna, What do you say we roll the interview that I did with Tim?
That sounds great.
All right, let's get to that. All right, it is my absolute privilege, my honor, to welcome the prestigious Tim McFarland to this episode of Life Matters, a Penn Mutual podcast. Tim, thank you so much for taking time out of your super busy schedule to join us here today.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for having me.
So let's just dive in because we don't have a ton of time to have our discussion here today, but we wanted to talk about kind of that middle market estate planning for people that aren't necessarily focused on transfer taxes, at least from a federal perspective. And I do think that one of the biggest misnomers in our industry is that estate planning is really about planning for estate taxes or GST taxes or gift taxes or whatever it may be. But let's face it, 99.9% of the people out there are not subject to federal estate taxes. So that would be giving up a whole lot of potential clients if we only focused on that 0.1% when we're talking about wealth transfer planning. So what are some of the concerns, the issues that we can help clients with that are in that umbrella of doing estate planning but are not focused on federal estate taxes?
Sure. I mean, I think that's a really important point. Estate planning isn't just about estate taxes. It's about an individual's life and how they want to leave assets to the next generation or to charity. So oftentimes people who are not looking today and very likely not even have a federal estate tax after the sunset in 2026, they still have a need for liquidity should an unexpected death occur. For instance, they may have income replacement issues. If they're a young couple that are doing very well, up and coming wealth, they may have assets that are taking a while to mature, and therefore they might have capital calls, or they might have to take a haircut if they were to have to liquidate those assets on an unexpected death. Family businesses, not all family businesses are $100 million businesses. A lot of family businesses are very successful, but the value is under that threshold. And so there's always going to be a need to decide how to protect that business going forward, how to provide for individuals who may be in the family and running and going to take over the business versus those children who are not going to be in the business. So from a buy-sell planning point of view or a business succession planning point of view, they may need to plan for equalization or treating a family member fairly. If a daughter is going to run the business and the son is an artist, should the son get equal treatment or should the son be treated fairly to recognize the daughter's future sweat equity in the business? There are also moral obligations that some people feel. And what I mean by this is simply that you may have a disabled child. So all the special needs planning that we talk about doing, or an individual may be taking care of a friend, a sibling, or someone else who they're not necessarily romantically involved with or even have a blood relationship with, but feel like it's necessary for them to take care of those individuals. Again, just about anything that you can think of, if there was a risk to a loss to the planning for that family that would require immediate cash, then life insurance is going to be a way to help plan for that.
So I talk to financial professionals about this all the time, that wealth transfer planning isn't just about planning for the ultra affluent. And I get feedback that, hey, I'm not really in the wealth transfer market. But my response to those people is, unless you are 100% in the Coley-Boley marketplace, you are in the wealth transfer market, because just about everything that we do from an individual standpoint, whether it's equalization, special needs planning, just traditional death benefit protection for family protection, those are all technically pieces of wealth transfer planning and estate planning. And I think that everybody needs to keep that in mind when they're talking to their clients and planning for them going forward, that estate planning isn't just about estate taxes.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you plan for these kinds of events, you're looking at irrevocable life insurance trusts are not just to hold life insurance to pay estate taxes. Trusts are designed to be able to allow the donor to dictate how they want their assets to be transferred down and used by the future generations. So whether it's just a straightforward irrevocable life insurance trust or it's a SLAT where there's spousal access. The planning ideas that we use can still be used for non-taxable events. In fact, most often, if you look at dispositive provisions of trust, it's going to be about how do we take care of children, grandchildren, and future generations.
Dispositive might officially be the fanciest word we've ever had on Life Matters, a Penn Mutual podcast. So well done, Tim. Well done.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Hey, I got a question the other day and I really didn't have a good answer for it, but it fit right into our discussion that we're having here today. So I thought I'd ask it to you. Whatever happened to the good old credit shelter trust? Do you see them used a lot these days, either with or without Q-tip provisions?
It's interesting. I do. And in states where you still have estate tax issues to worry about, for instance, here in Massachusetts, if you die with more than $2 million, you're going to have an estate tax. We do not have portability like you do under the federal system. So we do use family trusts and we use Q-tip trusts at the same time. And because we have to have a state marital deduction, we end up with 3 trusts. We end up with a credit shelter trust, a state-only marital trust, and then a federal and state trust. And so we do still plan a lot with them. I do see them a lot. I see them mainly in states where you still have a state estate tax, and the exemption amount is low relative to the federal exemption, even when you cut the federal exemption in half, roughly in 2026. And yes, I do see Q-tip-like provisions in the family trust, especially with families where the spouses, the only reason they're separating the trust is because their lawyer told them to. Otherwise, everything would have gone to the spouse. And so you may see mandatory income just in the family trust rather than spreading income and principal among the spouse and the beneficiaries. It may be all for mom or all for dad for life, and then down to the children and the grandchildren.
So there are probably people listening right now that are saying, what's a Q-tip? That's the thing I usually clean my ears with, but I've never heard of it in regards to estate planning. Can you give kind of a 30, 60-second overview in regards to what a Q-tip is?
Sure. Whether it's federal or state, anything over the exemption amount is going to be subject to estate tax unless you leave it to the spouse. And a lot of people don't want to leave assets outright to the spouse because that doesn't allow for future planning, post-mortem planning. So what a Q-tip trust does is it basically says, if you set up this trust with these types of provisions and you make an election on your estate tax form, we will defer the tax until the spouse dies. And we'll then include whatever's left in that trust in the spouse's estate, but there'll be no tax when the first spouse dies. And basically what you need to do is all the income has to go to the spouse during life. No one can have access to the income or principal during life. And then at the end of the day, basically the assets can transfer once the spouse has died. This was an addition that came in the 81 Tax Act. It's getting old now. But before that, you only had 2 options. You either had to leave the assets outright, or you had to allow the spouse to have what's known as a general power appointment, which means he or she could appoint it to any person in the world. And a lot of people didn't like that idea. They thought it was too restrictive. And so we got this idea like, okay, we'll let you go a little bit further as long as basically the spouse gets everything during life and nobody else has any access during life. Then we'll allow you to do this. We have that at the federal level. As I just mentioned, Massachusetts has it at the state level. One thing to keep in mind, though, is a lot of states, the 16 states that have either an inheritance tax or an estate tax, not all of them have a corresponding marital deduction. So you may not be, although you may escape federal estate tax, you might not be able to escape state estate tax on the first death. And so you either have to leave everything outright to the spouse, or you have to plan to pay the tax on the first spouse's death, which is okay. I mean, you can have either a single life policy in either spouse, or the spouse that you think is going to predecease.
Well, if any of our listeners want more information on Q-tips, they are welcome to call Jenna Washatka in the advanced sales area here at Penn Mutual. She would be more than willing and happy to talk about Q-tip provisions until her face turns blue. Right now, we have a federal transfer tax exemption of $13.6 million. It's going to go up a little bit next year here, but we've talked about it plenty. But we're going to have essentially halving of that exemption, or at least scheduled to have a halving of that exemption on January 1st of 2026. So while 0.1% of the population right now is subject to estate taxes, that population gets much, much larger here on January 1st of 2026, unless we have a change here. What are you telling financial professionals that are working with clients that don't have a federal estate tax today, but might here in roughly 18 months? Should they start doing planning to figuring that they will have one? Should they wait? What are you telling financial professionals in those situations?
Well, I think you need to start planning today, to think about it today. Whether you take any action today is a different story. Those people who aren't going to have a federal estate tax now and may not even have one later, but could be right on the cusp of having one, I think that one option to do would be either buy some term insurance and be able to on each spouse, and then find a company. I think we know which company that is, that you can then put those together, or buy permanent single life coverage in what you think you might need, and you can always up it later. I never like to hesitate to put life insurance in place today because of I don't know what underwriting is going to be like tomorrow. We've had too many stories over our careers, Bill, where people hesitate and then they go back to the doctor and they get the worst possible news, or God forbid they're killed in a car accident and the insurance now can't be put in place. So I'm telling people to plan as if you're going to have a need, figure out what that need is as close as you can get, and either buy term insurance or buy permanent insurance. Chances are you've got a need for permanent insurance somewhere else anyway. If you're in that mid-affluent market, there's either income taxes, there's like we talked about earlier, all the different reasons why you would need liquidity on an out-of-order death or a premature death. And so why not hedge that risk with insurance?
That's always solid advice. All right, now we're going to change gears a little bit here. So behind the curtain for all our listeners, we're recording this here in mid-June. And just last week, for the first time, at least in my career, I don't know, maybe your career too, Tim, the Supreme Court issued a decision which has a pretty substantial impact on life insurance planning in the advanced sales marketplace. It's the Connelly decision. I'm sure by the time everybody listens to this, you'll have at least heard about this decision. I know that we're doing a lot of education on it at Penn Mutual, but for those of our listeners that are saying, what is that? Tim, can you describe what happened last week and kind of what the effect is on both the estate planning and the buy-sell marketplace?
Sure. Connolly was a case that the Supreme Court took up from the Eighth Circuit. The Eighth Circuit is basically the part of the country that runs right up the Mississippi, from Missouri up through Minnesota and then North and South Dakota and Nebraska. And the reason they took the case up was because the Ninth Circuit, which is basically the West Coast, and then the 11th Circuit, which is basically Florida and Alabama and Georgia, had a decision, and these decisions revolve around, if I use a redemption agreement in a corporate context in a closely held business, and basically for simplicity, I'm just going to have the company redeem shares. Well, I've got to fund that because we all know that it is smart sense to fund an obligation with life insurance because you don't know when it's going to occur. So we had all thought for the last 20 years, because of a decision called Blount, which was in the 11th Circuit down in Florida, we had all thought that when you go to value that company for estate tax purposes, federal estate tax purposes, you have to value the company according to the regulations and according to some old revenue rulings. And one of those is, how do you handle life insurance? Well, most people thought that if you have a life insurance policy owned by the company, that yes, the policy has to be taken into consideration in determining the fair market value. But if you have a written redemption agreement that requires the company to use that life insurance death proceeds to purchase the shares and complete the redemption, then it was essentially a wash. No one would pay for cash and no one would pay for a liability. And so you basically washed those two out and you went with the fair market value you did consider the insurance, but it had no impact on raising the value. Well, the IRS and the tax court both thought that was wrong. And the district court in Missouri agree with that in the Connolly case. And they said, no, you do not take into consideration the redemption agreement because we believe that it has no effect on the actual value of the shares when all the dust settles. And the Eighth Circuit agreed with that. And we just found out last week that the Supreme Court did on a 9-0 decision. So it was a unanimous decision. And Bill, I'm going to not pontificate, and I'm not going to give my critical opinion of this case. What I will say is that going forward, when all the dust settles, redemption agreements funded with life insurance owned by the entity are dead. And what I mean by that is if you are going to have a redemption agreement and you are going to have the entity own the insurance policy, you're going to end up including that insurance in the value of the company. And the way the IRS looks at it, it's a dollar for dollar increase. For instance, in Connolly, the value of the company was $3.8 million. There was $3 million of redemption insurance for the majority shareholder, and the IRS, the district court, the Eighth Circuit, and the Supreme Court now tell us that we add the $3 million, and so that the value is actually $6.86 million for purposes of estate taxes. So what does that mean? I think going forward, what that means is we're going to be looking at cross-purchase type arrangements, or some of us have been thinking about for the number of years, insurance LLCs, where in order to avoid some of the problems that you have with multiple shareholders when you start to multiply the policies, you use a life insurance LLC, tax as a partnership. It's a very tax efficient way of owning life insurance. And then the shareholders are members of that LLC. They buy the LLC buys the insurance. They pay the premiums through capital contributions, and the buy sell is affected that way. So that's great going forward. But as a practical matter, what do we do with existing arrangements? And I think from that point of view, we have to look at what type of policies are currently owned in the entity, whether they're term insurance, permanent insurance, and whether if they're permanent insurance, they have a gain in them. The good news is we have ways of dealing with that. We have our old friend endorsement split dollar. We have 1035s that we may be able to use. There may be sophisticated partnership planning ideas that we can work with the clients, other advisors, the attorney, the tax attorney, the partnership or corporate attorney. We can move those policies to where they need to be, or we can just start over and just start over from a cross-purchase type of an arrangement and buy new insurance. And if there are negative tax consequences because of gain in policies, then so be it, and we just start over. One of the things we do need to be worried about, and we always have to worry because it's a trap for the unwary, is whatever we do, we always have to consider the transfer for value rules in whatever we're going to do. It's always out there. It's just one of those boxes we check off and make sure we looked at it all the way through.
Yeah, so there was a lot in there.
Yep.
We could be talking about this for an hour, but we don't have an hour for this podcast. I will say that if people have questions about anything that Tim just mentioned, feel free to reach out to the advanced sales team at Penn Mutual. And I will say that the insurance LLC idea that Tim mentioned, we actually call that PASS. So if you want to talk more about PASS, feel free to reach out to us here as well. I do want to take issue with one thing that you said, though, Tim. You said stock redemption agreements are dead. I think that that's probably true for a certain part of the marketplace. If you are working with really small business owners where the double inclusion of the insurance and the business interest isn't pushing them over the threshold of having an estate tax, I could still see stock redemptions used in those situations. But obviously, if you're getting close to that threshold where you're going to be subject to estate taxes, especially in 2026, it's something that you do have to be cognizant of going forward.
Definitely agree with you on that, Bill. And I think after all that we've said with Connolly, and we will say over the coming months, I think the important thing is it's not the end of the world. It's not what the outcome that we would have liked. It's not the most practical outcome that should have happened, but it's not going to keep us from planning. And the good thing for your listeners out there is this is a perfect opportunity in the middle of summer to get in front of your COIs and to get in front of your clients, your business owner clients, and have this conversation with them. Particularly as you, Bill, and your group start to put out more materials on this, this is a perfect opportunity to stay in front of your clients and to add that extra value and make them sticky.
Couple of quick fun questions before we go here today. First one, you spent a long time as an advanced sales attorney working for a carrier. Now you work for a distribution partner. You also had some time kind of in the middle ground where you were more independent. What would you say is the biggest difference in being advanced sales for a carrier versus either working for a distribution partner or being independent?
Wow. Well, I will. Let me start by saying that I have had the privilege of working in this industry as an attorney for the last 25 years. I've been an attorney for, I'm not going to say how long now, too long. I would say that the obvious difference is that when you're outside of a carrier, you're agnostic as to who the carriers are. Although, of course, you know that we love Penn and great company and great products. I do have a little bit more flexibility in working with clients directly than I do or would have when I was in-house, if you will, with the insurance companies. I think it's relatively the same. You know, Bill, you and I know we've known each other for a long time. There's not really a lot of us who do this, so we all sort of know each other, and we all know that, you know, what we do is to help people. So there are little nuances in-house. The nice thing about being in-house is you know your products inside and out, and you know the people who work in your company, and so you can develop relationships there and be able to help clients because of that collegiality that is there with the companies. That just comes from being in-house. Partners has the advantage of having that close connection with the carriers, like Penn, with you, with all the other team members. You can't discount enough, or not discount the being able to be in-house and to have that camaraderie inside. I don't think a lot of people realize whether they're insurance professionals or end user clients, the insureds, what that can do in terms of added customer support post sale.
Last question for you.
Yep.
Obviously, I live in the LA area. You live in the Boston area. Why are Boston sports fans such jerks?
Come on, Bill. First of all, I got to tell you, Bill, I'm from Pennsylvania. So I grew up a Phillies fan, and you want to talk about fans, just go to a Phillies. Just go to any Philadelphia game in a paraphernalia other than the local teams, and you'll find out what bad fans are.
I was just at 2 Phillies games last week, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, if you're not a Phillies fan, don't go in, particularly if you're not an Eagles or a Flyers fan. I have been in Boston for over 30 years, and I guess it comes with the territory. Nobody, let's take the Patriots, for instance. Nobody in Boston who grew up in the last 20 years or so knows what it's like to not win. And they're going to find out. I've been waiting 50 years for my Dolphins to win another Super Bowl. So I've had the pain. So I think it comes with a little bit of maybe a little obnoxiousness from having won so much. And now we're seeing that they don't. Now, go Celtics. That's all I can say. But
boo.
Peter Chung down in Dallas is not happy with me for saying that.
No, he's not, but that's okay. Tim, thanks so much. Great conversation. Really appreciate your time and your insights. Really valuable. I'm sure the listeners of Life Matters at Penn Mutual Podcast got a lot out of it. So again, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, and my pleasure.
Well, thanks again to Tim. Just a great guy and a wealth of knowledge in regards to advanced planning. So now let's get to our second interview. And Jenna, you had another one of our team members on Life Matters, a Penn Mutual podcast, and this was her first appearance on the podcast. I know you talked a lot about planning for the 1% and the sunset.
Yes. So you're right. I was lucky enough to interview my teammate, Amy Bryant. Now, Bill, you know this, I know this, maybe not everyone knows this, but in the world of estate planning, Amy is kind of a Jedi master, right? So who better to talk about a very famous sunset than a Jedi? So for me, it made all the sense in the world to talk to Amy about the sunset. But we were talking, like you mentioned, about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the sunset of, in particular, the applicable exclusion amount, which we're expecting to happen in 2026. What does that mean? It means we're expecting more people to have an estate tax problem starting January 1st, 2026. And in particular, Amy and I focused on the high net worth market, as you said, kind of the 1% and how to plan for that sunset.
Well, thank goodness we're not on Tatooine, because Tatooine famously has two suns. So they have a double sunset.
That's exactly. Hopefully we only have the one.
Let's get to that interview you did with Amy.
Awesome. Sounds great. So let's dive right in. Amy, you and I are going to focus sort of in this part of the podcast episode on planning for your true high net worth clients. So I think just as a baseline, can you start by defining for us, like, what is a high net worth client for purposes of this discussion?
Yeah. And actually, that's probably the most difficult question on our list today, because I tell you what, if you ask 10 different financial professionals, 10 different carriers, you're going to get 10 different answers on that. But given the context of our subject matter today, really what we're talking about are taxpayers above that lifetime exemption amount. So for a married couple, I target 50 million. That's
Okay.
a good round number for a married couple, because individual lifetime exemption is 13.61 million. So 13.61 million this year.
That's perfect. And I like it because it's easy math. Like, I can remember 50 million. I'm not sure I can always remember 13.61, but times 2, but I can remember 50. So perfect. So talk to us about these high net worth clients and how much time they have. I know we've got the sunset coming. We're on the clock. How much time in reality do they still have to use the lifetime exemption?
They don't have a lot, quite frankly. It's not a lot of time, not when you're doing this type of planning, because this type of planning is so very sophisticated. So they really need to hustle.
Yeah. And for someone who doesn't even know like what the first step is, what would you recommend be some of the first steps, and what kind of obstacles or challenges might they anticipate having in this process?
So the first step, if I'm a financial professional, the first step is to light a fire, to get that client motivated and move them forward. Because 9 times out of 10, client procrastination is the highest hurdle to clear, especially when you're on a timeline. So the client needs to decide, what does their legacy look like? What are their estate planning goals? And they need to pull the trigger and move forward with this. Now, the next step is to meet with an attorney. You need an estate planning attorney who knows what they're doing in this market, who can put the techniques together. And when I look at my network and my attorney friends who are in this market, they're swamped. They've got a lot going on. And so some of them are like, you know what, I'm not going to be able to take clients this time next year. We're just not going to be able to get it done. So yeah, first step, client makes decisions. Second step is to get in and see that attorney and get on their calendar.
Awesome. Okay, Amy, I know that this is a podcast format and we only have so much time, but can you just give me like a quick list of the greatest hits? Like, for clients in the high net worth market, what are some of the, I don't necessarily want to say tried and true, but what are some of those like latest and greatest planning ideas that you see a lot of high net worth clients using to reduce their estate?
The beauty of our team is that we see plans that are coast to coast on a national level. So we get to see the latest and greatest that's out there, but we also see the patterns. And in high net worth market, if I'm a financial professional, I know I need to stay on top of these specific techniques. Okay. If you're writing a list, here we go. So the first is, you always are. Okay. The first, irrevocable trusts, and the versions that you normally see: ILITs, irrevocable life insurance trust; SLATs, spousal limited access trust; GST trust, which are generation skipping trusts, and your dynasties. So you're going to see a lot of that type of trust work. Now, the other technique that you see, and it's often coupled with that irrevocable trust, is the family investment LLC. And then third, I would say, is charitable planning in this market, because there are a lot of tax benefits to that. But I tell you what, we could spend the better part of this afternoon deep diving into all of those. But if you got those three things down, the irrevocable trust, the LLCs with discounts, don't forget your 2704s, and then your gifting strategies, you've got a good handle on the tried and true techniques.
Got it. And so this is kind of a silly question, but like for those who are listening, can you help us connect the dots in terms of like, how do those techniques help me beat the sunset that's coming?
That's a good question. So when you're dealing with estate tax planning, when you're trying to address estate taxes, really there are three different ways to address estate tax. And this is for any client. The three different ways: reduce that which is subject to estate tax. The second, create liquidity. And the third is the combination of the first two. And in the ultra high net worth market or high net worth market, you're dealing with the combination of the two. So trust work will move assets out of the estate. That's why that $13.61 million is so important. That's the amount that the client, the taxpayer, can move during their lifetime or at death, but why die to use a technique? Let's do it now. To move while gifting into these irrevocable trusts. So that's why that 13.61 is so key. And why there is this sense of urgency is in 2026, that 13.61 million is going to drop. It's going to drop back to we're approximately 6.5 to 7 million. It's the spread that we're trying to pick up. And the IRS has promised us, now IRS promise, take it for what it's worth, they have promised us that they will not, quote unquote, claw back that spread if our clients use it. I'm fairly certain that they will stick to that. I don't know anyone, who has said that they take issue with that. So we are planning around anti-clawback and this 13.61 that we can use to reduce the estate, put it in an irrevocable trust, and then we shift gears into liquidity. That's when we start looking at our life insurance.
Fantastic. And I love how you take these things that are intensely complicated and complex, and you make it look easy. You make it sound easy. And that helps me digest, okay, all of these planning strategies that maybe I'm a financial professional. I don't do a lot in this market. And so to have someone sort of boil it down for me in a way that I can process is super, super helpful. And you just talked a little bit about cash value life insurance. So as those listening probably know, Amy and myself, we work for Penn Mutual, life insurance company. And so curious to hear, like, I mean, I know I'm biased, but it seems like a lot of these strategies play really well with cash value life insurance. Can you back me up on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's look at those irrevocable trusts. We're moving assets into those trusts. We're gifting, we're selling, closely held business interests. However, we're funding those trusts. What we're doing is we're using those gifts to fund the premium going into life insurance policies. Now, whether it's a second to die or first to die, that's a planning issue for that specific client. What's important, though, is that the trust owns this policy. At the grantor's death, the death benefit is paid into the policy and it's received income tax-free by the trustee. That's where our second generation can use that liquidity in order to take care of any potential estate tax issues that might be out there. I often get the question, well, how do they do that? The liquidity is in the trust, right? Well, the trustee can loan over to our estate, or we can buy assets out of the estate. So in other words, we're swapping, maybe the real estate or maybe the stock that's owned in the decedent's estate by using the liquidity that's in that trust.
That's fantastic. So I guess none of us have a crystal ball or a time machine, unfortunately. But let's say we do have a time machine. We fast forward in time to after the sunset. What do you think planning will look like for these clients after the sunset?
Well, for the high net worth client, it's going to be substantially more challenging because we're going to lose that spread. We're going to lose, almost half of our lifetime exemption. And so that's going to be very difficult. If that happens, we're going to, have to squeeze as much impact out of that lifetime exemption as we can, which means shifting into those discounts, into using it for things that we may not have used it for before. I think, though, too, and Tim McFarland, our other speaker on this podcast, is really addressing this in detail, but it's going to open up the market for estate tax planning into your, I call them the middle rich, but it's, your mom and pop, your small businesses, your families and your farmers. It's going to open this issue up for them, and we're going to have to address that. And that's going to be a little bit of a different market, because I know that people in that market can't just carve out $13.61 million in assets and stuff it into an irrevocable trust. They need to hold those assets. So we're shifting gears into, the liquidity planning.
Amy, this is awesome information. And we're just wrapping up with a couple questions. What would you say for any financial professionals who are listening today? What would be the key takeaways for them? The key things you want them to remember about the sunset?
So, okay, first off, remember that the sunset currently is impacting a lot of different planning issues for us. It's not just the lifetime exemption for estate tax planning. It's other things like the 199A for your business owners, the individual income taxes, your highly compensated executives, and deferred comp planning. But again, we could do a whole nother podcast on just that issue. The takeaway for estate taxes, make sure that your high net worth clients use that lifetime exemption. If they don't use it, they're going to lose it.
Fantastic. Amy, let's finish with a fun question. So Amy and I were just in Washington, D.C. for FinSec's Advanced Markets, which was phenomenal, by the way. And during one of the presentations, there were two people sitting on stage, sitting down, and in between them on the table was this really fancy, expensive bottle of tequila. So Amy, I kind of wanted to have fun with this, but let's pretend that it's you and I, and we're sitting up there on the main stage, and you get to choose the bottle that's in between us. What's the bottle? What are we drinking later?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's so many to choose from. There really are. I kind of liked the amaretto that we had in Washington. Do you remember?
I certainly do. That was fabulous amaretto.
That was fantastic. But, really, I think that given our style, we'd probably get not necessarily a bottle, but a couple cups of a good coffee, maybe a latte or a mocha.
I am here for that. Anytime you want, I am here for that. Awesome. Well, Amy, I can't thank you enough for a fantastic conversation, for sharing your knowledge with the field. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Wow, Jenna, that was an awesome interview. I feel like it was a session with Yoda where I learned, try not, just do.
It's not quite it, but yes. Yes, I felt the exact same way about Amy. You know what? And funny enough, after we talked, Amy, she was very insistent. She said that she wanted all the calls on the Q-Tip Trust. So,
oh wow,
anyone listening needs a person to call. I think it's going to be Amy. Not, in other words, nose goes, not it.
Yeah, we have awesome resources on the Penn Mutual Advanced Sales team, and anybody on the team, especially if they have a JD after their name, should be able to help with those Q-tip questions.
Absolutely.
I know, because I know everybody's going to be listening to this, and we see the metrics. We literally have thousands of listeners to this show. They're all going to be saying, "What's a Q-tip? How can I incorporate it into my practice?" And they're all going to call Amy Bryant to learn all about it.
There you go.
All right, so we have some housekeeping things before we end today. First of all, as a reminder, at the end of every single podcast between now and the sunset, which you're all very educated on now, we are reminding everybody how many days away we are until the sunset. Jenna, as of the date of publication of this podcast, we will be 519 days away from the sunset.
That's right.
That seems like a lot, but that's not even 2 Super Bowls from now. It's amazing.
Think of all the skyline you can have between now and then, Bill.
Well, if I had 3 meals a day for 519 days, what would that be? 1,557 times that skyline if I was to do that. I'm pretty sure that would have poor effects on my body, but who knows?
That is some remarkably quick math.
Thank you. I'm really good with numbers if it's just numbers. You start throwing letters and other signs in there, I'm a mess. So
that's not even math at that point.
Yeah, exactly. In addition to that, I wanted to remind everybody that if you have a question for me or for Jenna, or if you want to get a hold of Amy to talk about Q-tip trusts or anything else, or if you have a question for Tim, because I was just texting with him this morning. He is somebody that I have on speed dial. You're welcome to reach out to us at lifematters@pennmutual.com. Again, that's lifematters@pennmutual.com. That's an email address that only I have access to, and I do respond to every email that does come in there. Again, that's lifematters@pennmutual.com. Now, also, if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe or follow the show on your favorite podcasting app, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever you use to listen to podcasts. Following the show or subscribing, make sure that you don't miss any future episodes. One last thing, if you are a follower or subscriber on Apple Podcasts, stop by and leave us a review. Reviews help to boost visibility of the show. Now, again, we've seen the metrics. There's a lot of you out there listening. We have reviews. I appreciate everybody that stopped by to do a review, but we need more. So stop by, leave us a 5-star review. If you type out a little paragraph, both Jenna and I will be your best friends. I know it's hard to have 2 best friends, but we would both be your best friends. I was actually sitting with a financial professional at a meeting last week. Not only did he subscribe to the show in real time while I was sitting with him, he actually left a 5-star review right there and then. I mean, it just took that short of an amount of time. So please stop by, leave us a review. So Jenna, any final words before we wrap today?
No, thanks again for having me.
All right. So for Jenna Washatka, Tim McFarland, Amy Bryant, I'm Bill Bell. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update.